well, I'm Tanya Treptow. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for coming. So I'm a user experience researcher at Centralis, and my goal today is to look at two terms, the user and the visitor, and to generate some thought about how we can ensure that the needs of both users and visitors are being met when designing mobile apps for in-gallery museum use. So when you talk about the user and the visitor, it depends where you're coming from. For example, my former background is working in curatorial design for Islamic art, where we talked about how to engage visitors. But now I help to test usability of websites and apps, and there we focus on how to best meet the needs of users and to adapt design to that. So in museums, the digital technology that a user uses and the area that the visitor visits are often the same spaces, and it's the same people. And the first step to untangling this relationship is to be more precise about what is the definition of user experience and visitor experience. How many experiences are we dealing with here? Well, one way to approach it is that the visitor experience is a process. Visitors bring in their prior knowledge and motivations. They have to orient to the space of the museum. They have a strategy for navigating, and they interact with the content in many multitudes of ways. And the visitor experience, or excuse me, the user experience is actually very similar. It can be described as a process too. Users have expectations for what a device is. They have a starting point where they come to a landing page. They have a strategy for navigating through the interface, and they also have interactions with content pages. So if these processes are so similar, what happens when they come together for a museum experience for a mobile app? Well, what happens is that things get a bit complicated. One way of looking at it is that the user experience of the app supplements or enhances the visitor experience at different points of time. And because the visitor has different goals at different points of time, the mobile app needs to account for those goals while also being clear in its own process. So we have a model, but how to apply it? We're still dealing with the central question of how to evaluate the relationship between user and visitor experiences. So I'd like to talk about usability testing, which I do often. This is beta testing or prototype testing, and it's an iterative step that goes from generating ideas and before a full implementation of a design. It's evolved primarily to evaluate standalone digital interfaces to help uncover deeper human needs. So a typical test, we bring people who represent target audiences, and we watch them use a prototype in an intended environment. We have them complete tasks, we have them think aloud about their experience. We ask open-ended questions like, what are you looking at? And what will you expect will happen next? And from that we get a sense of how they think things will work and where that doesn't match with the designer so that we can change the design to better meet those needs. So when you bring this kind of technique to a museum, there's some real challenges. First, there's challenges of budget, time, and resources. It can be a tough sell to senior staff who aren't familiar with this technique and still need evidence that mobile is even appropriate for the museum. Plus, visitors have such broad goals that it's difficult to determine the right questions to ask and the right scope to take for something like this to be effective. But I think that usability testing can be a useful tool both for in-house design and to evaluate partners' work with designers. And the scope is key for usability testing. You can test the interface itself and have people start from that interface and make sure that it works well. But there's a broader goal, which is to test that visitor experience and the connection between the visitor and user. And for that, the scope needs to be broader, starting at the museum door, and even before to see where visitors become users. One way is through orientation. Visitors may use the app this way, and they need to be able to access maps within the interface itself, but what points of the museum visit are they most likely to need a supplement for an app? At what points are they likely to use digital content and signage together? And a usability test needs to address this broader level. They can have participants start in a lobby with a prototype app, but ask them to use all the resources around them to find the restroom or find where might something be located in a gallery. And you can observe where there's any gaps in this experience where they need to be improved. You can also evaluate how users are navigating the museum. They're planning their day, and they need to understand the range of options available on an app, but what questions are they most likely to engage with? How do visitors with different levels of background knowledge need or appreciate different types of guidance? And for example, one way visitors are unsure of approaching an unfamiliar topic, an app can suggest a starting point to allow them to explore outwards in ways that meet their own interests. And for a usability test, a good way to evaluate this is to start with an interview. Ask people what they expect to to move through the museum and use what resources they can find, but then see how the app changes their approach and whether they are appreciating that or not. Finally, users can interact with the museum content itself. And this is very complex and an open-ended experience. So for usability testing, the question is, where is the challenge at? Are visitors challenged by new ways of thinking, or are they challenged by the process of the user experience rather than the visitor experience? And usability testing can address both. For example, problem-based learning, that's where the visitors need to have their minds engaged and thinking in new directions. But the app itself is not what their attention should be at. So when you begin a usability test, you could ask broadly, please use the app to explore the object in any way you like and see where they're going and what questions they have in their mind. As well for sensory learning, people are exploring things in intuitive and sensory ways. You could take a minute before having them use an app to ask them, what do they expect this interface will do for them? What will that experience be? And once they use it, get their reactions to whether they're bewildered or enjoying that engagement. And then also for social learning, visitors can be challenged by each other or by an app that replicates a social experience. And usability testing can observe whether they have a fluid conversation with each other and the app, or whether that's separate. So overall, what can we learn from this? Well, the user and the visitor experience are truly interconnected, and ideally, the best way to improve both is by observing them in action together.